Hi, my name is Melanie Bertrand, and I'm an assistant professor in Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College at ASU. I study youth voice and participatory action research with youth with the aim of challenging systemic racism in schools. I was a 2016-2017 Lincoln Center Fellow along with Dr. E. Sybil Durand.
Hi, my name is Salinas, and I'm a third-year doctoral student also at Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College. And my work focuses on understanding how teachers talk, think, and learn about inclusive education policies relating to English language learners with disabilities. Previously, I was a fellow with the U.S. Office in the Department of Special Education and also with ASU as a Noel Chad Gray Fellow.
So today we're going to be talking about youth voice and participatory research and ethics issues involved in that. So to start off with, how can youth voice inform policies and practices? So it can range from simply being heard, like students taking a survey, to collaborating with adults, to actually building youth's leadership capacity. And this is what Dana Mitra and Stephen Gross argued when they published this pyramid of student voice. Participatory action research with youth actually spans these levels and includes a lot of collaborating with adults and also building collaboration capacity for leadership and also simply being heard.
So in the ideal participatory action research project with youth, it is the youth who set the research topic based on issues that they identify, and it can be based on their experiences in their schools or in society at large. It involves authentic collaboration between youth and adults for the purpose of disrupting hierarchies not only related to age, but also potentially with race and other socially constructed forms of difference that have been used to oppress individuals and groups. Finally, it aims to make changes that promote social justice. This understanding of participatory action research with youth comes to us from the work of Louis Rodriguez and Tara Brown.
So our discussion today is grounded in a PAR project in the southwestern United States, in addition to other PAR projects that I've been involved with. This is an after-school program that began in January 2015, and participants have included junior high students, a teacher, and also 3 university-based researchers. So that's Dr. E. Sybil Durand of ASU, Dr. Tausia Gonzalez of the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and also me. And so the majority of the youth have been Latinx, and of the adults, they have represented a range of racial and ethnic identities, and I've been the only one identifying as a white person in there. In this project, the youth have chosen to research a variety of issues that they affected them on a daily basis, either in their school or in their community. So they've chosen, for instance, to research police brutality, racism in school, homophobia, or even stereotyping, and have presented that research to school adults and also their fellow students, and in addition to presenting it at some conferences.
So relating to participatory action research with youth and research in schools, there are 2 levels of ethics issues that we must consider. The first is related to youth voice in general.
Yeah, and the second is related to participatory research in general. So youth voice could be after-school programs that are not even subject to research. They might be youth voice programs, things like that. And then there's the other level of participatory research in general, which could be with youth, it could be with adults, but it's anything where people are participating in a setting versus just kind of sitting back and observing.
Exactly.
So, Sarah, what have you seen in terms of some ethics issues related to student voice?
So related to student voice, one issue that I observed, and that's been observed in our analysis over time relating to this project, is that when youth and adults are brought together in schools, as in the case of this youth participatory action research project, we need to be aware of the power dynamics at play between members of the different groups. For example, the youth institutionally inhabit a role of student, which is differential and not as traditionally seen as hierarchically powerful as that of the adults who may be teachers, counselors, administrators, or holds other roles.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so just as you were saying, I mean, as youth enact a lot of power through PAR, they still hold this institutional position that doesn't have as much power as adults.
You're right, and that relates to the concept of adultism, which is the idea that adults are viewed as better, more competent, taken more seriously, and more capable than youth, whereas youth are seen as naive, inexperienced, and incompetent, and not knowing what is best or what's better for them.
Mm-hmm.
The second point is the issue of reflexivity. So reflexivity operates at a couple different levels in this project. One, researchers need to be attentive to how their own presence and actions and interactions in the community may be impacting or disrupting that community's environment, but also what it means for adults who are participating in youth participatory action research, that they themselves need to be aware and enact some reflexive practices about their own positions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's kind of what our research has shown too, that that reflexivity could help in those areas, because as you were saying, youth don't have that institutional role. A lot of the youth are marginalized along other identities related to race, social class, gender, sexuality, disability, language, and more. And so oftentimes youth have that power to speak and are speaking out, but unless there are some adults who are wanting to collaborate, the youth may not see the changes that they're wanting to see.
Right, and that brings us to kind of like the final reflecting point related to this is it ethical to be supportive and intentionally creating a space for youth voice when those youth are members of a community, in this case a school, where the adults may not necessarily be responsive?
Mm-hmm. Right, and that's what we found in our research, is that some of the adults didn't necessarily take that responsibility, and also didn't necessarily, or sometimes acted defensively. Mm-hmm. And so there are ethical issues. For instance, if you have school adults sponsoring a youth voice program, but not taking the youth seriously, there are ethical issues. Instead, we would say that the adults are duty-bound to leverage their position of power to work with youth. And also that adults should think about their own position in systems of oppression, such as white supremacy. Think about their position in that and be reflexive, like you're saying, and think about the intersections of adultism and racism, so that youth voice isn't simply tokenized. Mm-hmm. So now we're moving on to ethics issues related to participatory research in general. So Sarah, what have you seen in terms of participatory research ethics issues?
So in terms of participatory ethics issues at large, one issue is to be aware of, especially with adults, on how your presence there, or in the research process itself, may impact the relationships between the youth and adults or persons or groups in that setting. For example, how might the relationship between students or youth and teachers, the adults, change as certain teachers, but not all, came to view or perceive their own roles as being important and the accountability to promote greater support for youth? Likewise, how might the relationships between the youth themselves change if not all youth held the same position? Finally, I would say we also need to be aware of the changes potentially in positionality and relationships between different teachers and staff, mm-hmm. because even within the adult group level, there are different hierarchical levels, such as grade level teachers or mm-hmm. counselors or administrators.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really good point. So also the research literature has really helped us to think about these issues. So for instance, there's a great book chapter by Eve Tuck and Monique mm-hmm. Guichard, And that talks about how hierarchies and systems of domination aren't magically erased by doing participatory research. In fact, they can be reinscribed. And then also there's a piece by Megan Bang and Shireen Vosugi that has talked about the need to understand the histories of a certain place and also be critically self-reflexive. And so thinking about all that, we'd like to offer a few questions for us to consider and also for viewers to consider who are doing participatory research. And the first is the research something that the community wants, for, in this case, the youth? Another question is the research contributing something? Is it making a contribution in some way beyond simply publishing those academic articles that we're all pushed to produce, right? And the third is related to member checking. So this is the idea in qualitative research of going back to participants and saying, hey, I did this analysis, check it out, see if it aligns with what you think. But there are ethics issues if you have a situation like we've had where you have school adults and you have youth. They're in completely different hierarchical positions. In fact, some of the adults, the youth, have commented how they're oppressing them. So we want to ask, who are you beholden to when you're doing these member checks? I would offer that, the first importance is to the interests of those who are most marginalized. And finally, that leads me to reflexivity. For me personally, I've learned to be hyper aware and hyper reflexive about my whiteness. We took videos in the PAR meetings, as you know. And so those videos actually became a great tool for me to look back on how I was with the youth. When was I not understanding their point? When was I taking up too much space or taking too much control? And so these videos help me to self-reflect, take those difficult steps to look at myself and to move forward, hopefully, and continue to grow in those areas. And so I would offer that other white researchers working especially with youth of color, but with anyone, really need to also have that self-reflection.
Yeah, and a lot of this also draws on ethical questions that relate to different types of research, including research that uses varieties of ethnographic theories and methods. And it relates back to, what is the purpose of the research? How is the community benefiting? What are you disrupting by being there? And then also to consider the ethics issue of what happens when participants may change their minds or withdraw consent about the use of the data.
Yeah, all good things to think about.
So this takes us to the end of our video. In this slide, we have included a short list of publications produced from this research with the YPAR group and project, as well as pieces that are under review and in progress. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. Here's also a list of the many people who've worked on the project. Thanks for your attention today, and thanks to the ASU Lincoln Center for Applied Ethics for this opportunity to talk about these issues.